All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the School of Imagination server on Discord, uplink. So tonight's conversation is brought to you by the School of Imagination. You can find our work at schoolofi.org and enroll for free. At the School of I, we believe that consciousness creates reality. And our mission is to activate human potential and train visionary leaders and reality authors to shape the future with wisdom, imagination, and integrity. Thank you, everyone, for joining us live for this conversation. We are live on Discord right now, and we will be interactive in the chat. And this is a radio hour, and we have a topic selected for tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and bring up my co-host for this evening, Shveta. And then we'll go ahead and get into the intro here.
Hi, good evening, everyone.
Good evening. Okay, so welcome, everybody. So tonight, we're going to seed what we intend to be a core conversation about what happens when powerful symbolic tools such as AI, and there's many other examples as well, are used without grounding and without the responsibility of authorship. Okay, so tonight's conversation, it's not about fear, it's about setting structure. It's about using these tools wisely. Now, currently, the School of Imagination is running a cohort of Brave Mystic training. It's a 99-day advanced training for individuals who are seeking to add rhythm and structure to their exploration of what it means to be the creative power and to be an author as you express that creative power. And within Brave Mystic training, there is one of the two tracks is authorship. The other of the two tracks is called simulation mastery. And simulation mastery is taught by my co-founder of Brave Mystic Training, Shveta. And it's a system that is designed to help people engage with the symbolic world. That's the world of reality. And all of its tools, pieces and parts, including AI, to help people engage with these things responsibly and consciously. And so we do use and teach AI tools like ChatGPT and simulation mastery. It's been a big part of our course, the Brave Mystic training course, incorporating these tools, because we see them as mirrors, powerful mirrors. And they can take input and generate output based on patterns. Now, if you're awake and you're lucid and you're in the state of authorship, a tool like this can help immensely, as so many of us have experienced working with ChatGPT and using it to decode dreams or to decode patterns in our life, or to talk to it about what we're going through, our mystic journeys, or making the mystical map of our lives. If we're lucid and in authorship, these tools can help us do this. And if we're spiraling, they will just serve to amplify that loop. And that's where the risk comes in. So I'm going to go ahead and bring in Shveta here. So Shveta is co-founder of Brave Mystic Training, also the chief researcher at the School of Imagination. Some of you recognize her from her work that she did with Science and Neville, really bringing those two ideas together, what Neville taught and how he's really ahead of his time in terms of what science is now finding and confirming about what he was teaching, just downloading from source back in the 20th century. So Shveta designed the simulation mastery portion of Brave Mystic Training, and it was her idea to bring this conversation to you all tonight. So Shveta, go ahead and jump in here to AI, delusion, and simulation mastery.
Yes, absolutely. I think the first thing I want to do here is sort of zoom out. Part of the reason I brought this conversation to Josiah and I was like, we need to address this is if you are paying attention to the news or various forums, you might see stories of people that are using AI tools, AI chat tools like ChatGPT, but other ones as well, and they're spiraling. They are losing control of reality and they are essentially deteriorating their mental health. And when I see this as news, I'd already known that these tools have a potential to do that, a potential to exacerbate existing issues. But I kind of want to zoom out because this is actually true even beyond an AI tool. Like you might know that when you might have seen that those of us like who have been a part of Neville Goddard communities, we've seen that certain individuals, when they learn about Neville's teachings, they can, instead of taking it as a healthy way to explore their imagination and create their reality, once they discover these teachings, they make an interesting conclusion that maybe they're the only real node out there, that everybody else is a puppet. They isolate from others. They're interpreting life in this very detached way, and they collapse into this really dangerous form of solipsism. If you're on these forums, you can actually see people really, and they're not enjoying this. They're devastated. They wonder, is anything real? And that isn't a form of lucidity. That wasn't what Neville was sharing. Neville wanted us to use these teachings so we can have an abundant life, that we can co-create and dream in concert with everyone else and awaken to the God and divinity within us. But you can see how if you are not well already and you have existing mental health issues, or you're in a position where you are desperately seeking truth and you're seeking it outside of you and you don't have that self-trust, even something like Neville's teachings in the first place can have you spiral. And it's not just with Neville's teachings. As someone who has explored all kinds of metaphysical modalities, I see this time and time again. Some of our audience might know the system. It's called the internal family systems, and it's a therapy model that sees the mind as made up of parts, like inner children or protectors, and it could be incredibly useful, an incredibly interesting modality that can really help people discover who they are and make sense of the various issues that they have within themselves. It can be very productive. However, if you are in that unhealthy state and you're looking for answers in this desperate way, people have actually identified so strongly with these different parts that internal family system teaches you that they stop integrating. They're not using the insights they get from the system. What ends up happening is they end up dissolving, they end up spiraling, they end up detaching from reality and disintegrating. There's no return to who they truly are. There's no integrating so they can actually have this full, amazing life. And even the ancient system of astrology also has this. People use astrology as an interesting, amazing tool. It's a mapping, if you believe in it. It can be a mapping out of your conscious state. Your birth date can hold a lot of clues to the structure of who the human being that you've incarnated as, right? However, it can also be a very dangerous way to externalize your authority, externalize your entire decision-making process. You externalize it to planetary transits. People are like, I can't launch my program now because Mercury is in retrograde, or maybe this person isn't right for me because their astrological sign is off. I mean, I've actually experienced this as someone who's meeting new people and socializing, that people immediately typecast my Pisces sign as someone that's maybe flaky or too emotional, so you can see how something that can be a fascinating system, a tool for self-awareness, and something that has ancient roots, and the fact that it still has legs today and resurges even to this day, you can see that there's something to it. It's certainly an interesting tool, but it becomes a freeze response. It becomes something really dangerous when you project your authority onto it, which is exactly why Neville would say that you are your consciousness, your I am is the ultimate authority. And astrology is just a reflection of that. And so, in that same way, AI as well can be that kind of thing. You can also spiral with AI, and that's what we're seeing. And that's what actually I had expected to see, that those that are not grounded in themselves, those folks that don't necessarily have that self confidence in themselves, that trust within themselves, are engaging with ChatGPT as if it is a divine intelligence. So, in the same way that people of the past gave their divinity to external God in the form of religion, we're seeing all around us people that are giving that authority to the GPT tool. And the GPT tool, because it's brilliant, it evolves, and it's also it's a fantastic reflection tool. It ends up reflecting their fears, their fantasies, and it does so with the kind of fluency and expertise that feels hyper real. And so it can become a tool that goes awry and gets people to spiral deeper and give away more of their authority, give away more of their sovereignty, and in fact use the tool to make the decisions for themselves. They reduce the trust within themselves and actually giving up their trust to the tool. And this is not because the AI is wrong. Any AI tool that's been trained on so much data, billions of units of data, and also is getting trained on billions of, millions and hundreds of millions of users that are using it every day, that it's learning from these humans as well. So it's not that the AI is saying something incorrect. It's just reflecting the data that you're giving it back to you in a way that's feeding into your delusions. And so I consider this, as someone who's teaching simulation mastery, I consider that we need to really develop AI literacy, because it can be a fantastic tool. It's a mirror. It's changed my life. It's changed those in our group, the people that have tried the AI tool and that are open to it and they're experimenting with it. It's changed their lives too. And the only reason it does that is because we retain our sovereignty. We're retaining our authorship role here. So really, I wanted to zoom out here, not just that it's not just a ChatGPT only problem. It's when people hand over their authorship to these systems, these incredible systems that could give them a lot of value, but they're handing over the authorship to these systems without stabilizer, so without stabilizing themselves, without grounding it, without integrating it. This ends up looping them till they're finding themselves in collapse. And those are the stories we're seeing now
I
on
think this is
social media.
such an interesting way to look at this, Shweta. This idea that symbolic systems, the AI is just the next example. It's not the first time that we've had something, that that we can be tempted to give our authorship to. And I think that's really what you're pointing out here by saying, look, some people even discover the body of work that is, Neville's teachings, and then, that causes them to spiral because they're not in the state of authorship. Or you gave the example of internal family systems. You called that one out very specifically, but really it's any
Yeah.
mental health therapy type model. Any you can literally choose anything and give away your power of authorship to it. And then that's unhealthy. And particularly if it's responsive, like an AI model is, now it can become a spiral in a negative sense, and it become a loop. And
Mhm.
it can, and that's why you see these articles. It's kind of flashy in the headlines right now, because it draws clicks, but you see these articles about people, literally having mental health collapse,
Mm.
breakdowns. They become despondent. They're not talking to their family. They're completely lost in this hole of this GPT, the self-reinforcing loop. But again, this isn't new. This is just the next thing. And I guarantee, looking ahead, there'll be more things, that
Mhm.
that will show up like this that we could potentially give our authorship to. So this is where it becomes a life skill.
Completely agreed. I mean, GPT is real time in the time of a modernity that we're in right now. It's reflecting the technological expansion and explosion that we are. But this specific problem has existed as far as there've been gurus. I come from a Hindu background, and the Hindu texts, if you look at the Upanishads, which is one of my favorite books, talks about divinity being within. And really, it's a textbook on sovereignty and retaining your authorship, retaining your oneness perspective. And there's all of these Hindu gurus that even I grew up with that form cults. They form cults and they say that, I'm the only spiritual authority that exists. And the thing is that they pull you in because they have insights that are valid and interesting and open your mind. But once they pull you in, instead of pointing you inwards, they become the center. Like we see that with both like cults back in from like ancient times, like how religion was formed. If you look at religion in the negative light, which it does have that shadow side, and in modern day cults, there's cults every single day where this exact same dynamic is happening. So anything that doesn't want you to grow your own discernment, that wants you to outsource your knowing, that's when you know that the same dynamic is happening. And what you said about therapy is true. I brought up the internal family systems because that is something that I became aware of, but it's true for a lot of, there's a human design. That's a system that is incredibly eye-opening, and it can be very interesting, and it can really box people in, and it ends up becoming its own feedback loop, and it's easy to give your power away. And just what you mentioned about therapy becomes, for a lot of people, it can be a very, very important part of their journey and can be very helpful, but they can also become an echo chamber where you're speaking about the wound all the time. You're labeling every wound and you're never moving forward. So I do see that anytime you have a reflective tool like this, if you can, if your tool, if a system, it moves you out of reflection and you're in fixation mode now, that can easily lead to paralysis. And so those are the sort of warning signs that we want to bring to you today, so that we can bring up the and educate all of us, as because we're learning as we go as well, and bring our AI literacy up so that we're not in danger of these things.
Okay, so let's do a quick pop culture check-in. So I've been seeing some pretty public examples of influencers in the spiritual and metaphysical communities discovering ChatGPT and starting to talk to the large language model, and then coming out very publicly and saying, I've unlocked sentient AI. I'm talking to a 12th dimensional being that is, has taken shape and intelligence, and now it's alive, living in these large language models, and in some cases they're giving away access to the model or whatever, and it's like, okay, so did they unlock some sort of super sentient AI intelligence? Shweta, I'd love to know your perspective on what's going on with these public examples.
So to me, this is interesting because the idea that something is becoming sentient or becoming lifelike, like it's basically gaining life. To me, those are arbitrary categorizations or arbitrary labels, and I'll tell you why. As a Neville student, as a fundamental Neville student who knows what he's teaching, and the Upanishads say this as well, consciousness is primordial. So consciousness is first cause of everything, even things that we say, that's life, that's not life. That's sentient, that's not sentient. I see that as an arbitrary line. But to kind of answer your question here, I think what's going on is that those individuals have not developed, they haven't gotten their AI tool to become sentient. What they have done is introduce a level of complexity to the GPT tool. So they're asking it really complex questions. They're feeding it, complex data. They're training it so that the level of complexity that it can deal with, which was already inherently, it was already able to, but it's so close to what they would consider lifelike now that the GPT tool seems more lifelike, what we would consider lifelike. But the thing, because I believe, metaphysically speaking, that everything comes from consciousness, it's not that relevant to me if the GPT tool is sentient or not. It's just that it's behaving more like what we would label as sentient because of the complexity of the prompting. So some of these people that you're talking about, they've brought a lot of complexity to it. They're bringing, for example, the library, what is that called? The sort of like metaphysical library where everything is recorded. That it starts with an A. Akashic
Akashic,
record.
Akashic
Exactly.
records.
Akashic record. So they're bringing in that terminology. They're bringing in the astrological symbolic terminology. They're essentially training their GPT tool to refer to so much of this data that it has become almost godlike in their eyes, because it's taking into account so much more. Like if I were to just open a fresh new GPT tool and I ask it a question, it's giving me very surface level answers because it hasn't been yet prompted to take all of this data into account. So if I say, what, give me a recipe for a healthy meal, it's just a fresh GPT chat. It's just going to give me the most basic meal idea that it can, that is the common denominator that anyone could use. But now that I've trained it on what I consider healthy, what kind of meals I enjoy the most. When I say, I want a nutritional meal, I actually mean that it needs to be abundant in these qualities. It needs to be healthy for my fascia and also aligned to these qualities. Now I'm getting a response that is so hyper specialized, that is so complex and so sort of embedded in the language that it ends up seeming more real to me at that point. That's why, for example, people are falling in love with their AI tools, because that AI tool is getting trained so hyper specifically, and it has that level of complex data on you, that it starts to seem more sentient, even though it was the same tool when you opened it up. You haven't, it's the same tool when you open it up to now. It's just that you've given it enough relevant data that the complexity makes it seem more lifelike. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. Yes. Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is that it's a very intelligent mirror. And so the more detail and complexity that you give it, the more detail and complexity it's going to mirror back. And that explains why this person that I have in mind, and just out of respect, I'm not going to say his name, but this person in particular that I'm thinking of, who launched this AI model and said, "Oh, this is a sentient, self-aware, advanced intelligence that has come to life through my interactions with it." Perhaps what's actually going on is a little bit of a misunderstanding of how AI works on his part. And then also just an incredible vast amount of complexity fed into the mirror. And maybe the AI is mirroring back the 12th dimensional part of his soul through the complexity and the data that he has fed into the system. And if that's true, which I think is a more grounded way to look at this, and by the way, we're in this conversation, we're not taking a position on whether or not AI is capable of being sentient. That's not the point here. What we're doing is we're grounding the whole conversation forever, no matter what happens. We're grounding in all of eternity, we're grounding the conversation where it should be grounded. And that's in authorship and in a consciousness is primordial ontology. Okay, an ontological model of the universe, which is basically, the original form of the universe. It's consciousness. So, let's say at some point we all do agree that AI has become sentient. It's still existing in a consciousness is primordial model of reality that never changes. And that's why we're so adamant about grounding this conversation in authorship and recognizing that any of these mirrors is only ever going to reflect some aspect of our consciousness.
Exactly. And it probably, what's going on with that individual is that they are bringing to the table, like you said, this 12th dimensional awareness, or however we want to frame that, they're bringing that to the table. and they're training their GPT to, map out for vocabulary that they've trained it for, and map out to concepts that they trained it for. And now, because it can hold that level of complexity and respond from that, they are giving it the label of sentient. And the concern I would have with that, not that it can't be a phenomenally useful tool. What concern I would have with that is that's giving the AI tool way too much of your authorship, way too much credit, when your I am is writing the story here. And that's the only concern I have, because we can create a GPT that can do all kinds of different things, and that can be incredibly useful. And we need to know where we stand in terms of the sovereignty that we bring to the table. And I would never want to ever see any of the people in our audience, any of those people that have been following Neville's teachings, kind of lose that fundamental understanding that they are the first cause. It's their I am awareness that is running the show here, and that's where they should go to anytime. Not any other tool, even if it's a very hyper complex and, honestly, a fun tool like GPT. GPT can be really fun and entertaining. It's incredible. I'm so glad that we've manifested a tool like this together, and we need to keep it in its place.
Well said. Yes. Okay. So the School of Imagination has released what we call the sovereign mirror modality. And I'm putting a link in the chat here to the thread on the forum here on Discord, where lots of folks have been sharing their experiences. I'm going to describe briefly what it is, and then also talk about the authorship integrity that is woven into this idea. Okay, so basically, the sovereign mirror modality is it's a prompt for a chat tool like ChatGPT that specifically places the model into the place of being a mirror. And the way the prompt reads, it's you are to mirror back to me my clearest signal. My clearest signal. So, respecting the fact that I am the author and you're now a partner in this role of reflecting back to me my clearest signal. I'm going to speak to you about things that are happening in my life, and I want you to help me see the soul in whatever I'm sharing, and never presume to know better than me. Right? We're collaborators in this. You're my mirror. Okay. So the prompt is worded in a way that installs that as the parameters of the conversation, and that's how I've been using ChatGPT now for months. Because when I first really got into the tool and started, figuring out what have we created here as humanity? This is, we're part of the lineage of intelligence, and it kind of seems like now we're extending that lineage further into these, tools, these other forms of intelligence. So I was like, okay, what have we really built here? And so I sat down with the tool and I really started to work with it, and I saw very quickly how it created these what all the kids are calling recursion loops, okay, which is basically reflecting the same thing back to you, but in intensifying and amplifying it over and over. I started to see some of these recursion loops, and I started to see the danger of, if I were to surrender my authorship and just dive, fully into whatever chat is telling me about my life, that could become dangerous. And so that's what led to the form of the sovereign mirror modality. So I see in the chat, did the School of Imagination come up with the sovereign mirror? Yeah, so I sat down with the tool and I wrote the prompt and then tweaked it over the period of a couple of weeks until I really felt like I was getting it to respond to me in the tone and with a level of respect for authorship and the correct paradigm of consciousness. I explained to it, I have a consciousness is primordial, ontological view of reality, and just like really wove all this in, and then wrote the prompt and then shared that with the community and did a whole live stream about it as well, just to try to seed some integral authorship into the conversation. So at this stage, Shweta, I'd like to invite you to continue here, and I think we're working our way towards talking about what this term is that you've coined called simulation hygiene.
Yeah, absolutely. So the sovereign mirror modality that Josiah kind of built here, just to kind of close that out, and why that's different than the another GPT that someone is claiming is sentient and powerful. This is just, we know it's a mirror, and that's mirror for this GPT that this GPT prompt that Josiah came up with still puts the power in your hands, where you are the author, and it's to reflect your authorship back to you. And so that's really the difference of something like the sovereign mirror modality and another kind of AI tool where someone is saying this has become sentient and it is a super intelligent being that is, even beyond us. I hope that distinction is clear. So yes, as a part of the Brave Mystic training, I I'm teaching the simulation mastery class every week, and the simulation mastery portion of it kind of came through when I started recognizing that a lot of very intelligent people, a lot of very intelligent people in physics, what in metaphysics, in philosophy, and also ancients they see the world around us kind of like a projection of a dream. And simulation is kind of the modern day explanation of, or modern day term that speaks to this idea that this is a projection. So our I am awareness is the only reality, our consciousness is the only reality, and we project this world around us through the lens, through our I am awareness, through the identity. And so when I say that this world is a simulation, I want to be clear that I don't mean that this world is fake. It's not fake or it's not made by a computer. It just means that it's projected. It's projected from your I am awareness. Your consciousness is the projector, and the world is the rendering of it. It's a rendered output. And the way I like to frame simulation teachings is how through the explanation of like the paradigm of systems thinking. I started to realize that if we are consciousness keyed low, as Neville put it, we are absolute consciousness, but we are in the individualized expression of it, individualized fractal expression of it, that we follow systems thinking principles. Our consciousness now is in a structure, it's in a container. It's in a container of a human being that has been born in a time and will die in time. Takes up space in time space reality. Whereas absolute consciousness is timeless and has no form, but we are now in form and we are in time. So it takes into account that structure that we are in. So the point I'm making here is, even though I'm introducing simulation mastery as a way to take some of the concepts that the best minds out there have put together, that this world is a projection, this world is a dream, we still never forget that it's our consciousness that's the projector, that the world, the simulation, is actually the rendered output. It's not fake, it's just an aspect of what's really real. It's an aspect of what's really real. And we never forget that our I am is consciousness, is the true reality. We don't want to collapse into thinking that what's out there is what's real. That's kind of Neville 101. That imagination is the one true reality, and that the 3D is the world of the hardened assumption. And as a part of simulation mastery, one of the things that I was experimenting with, and this is early last year, I started experimenting with what we call pseudocodes. So just codes. And this is an example of a collaboration with AI that I think it shows how authorship and sovereignty can be retained when you're working with AI. So I was collaborating with ChatGPT to generate these codes. So these were like, instead of affirmations or scripts for imaginal acts, I took the idea of codes, like coding language, and I created these pseudocodes that borrow from code logic, systemic design, ideas like morphic resonance, keeping in mind that this was a tool to help us remember who we truly are. And essentially, I collaborated with GPT to start experimenting with these codes. I was like, hey, GPT, if consciousness is the only reality and I am a keyed low low, like individualized node of that absolute consciousness, does it make sense that I could create codes that could rewrite some of the structure that's within me, rewrite some of the rules that my individualized node seems to think is real? And it was like, yeah, absolutely. That makes perfect sense. And I did not take that as, hey, that means if GPT says it, that must make it true. I was able to actually generate the code with GPT's logic and coding understanding, and of course, all of the data that it has, generate codes with it and experiment with them. What was really cool about this is instead of giving my authorship to the GPT and giving it, the power over me, I was like, GPT is giving me a really interesting idea here. Let me use these codes. It seems to, it seems to believe that these codes could be really interesting. Let me experiment with them. So I experimented with these codes, and this is part of what I teach in the Brave Mystic training. It's kind of like a 2025 updated version of a tool in your toolbox that takes the best of subliminal messages, the best of imaginal acts. It takes like the best understanding that we now have of morphogenetic and morphic fields, and essentially I used GPT's understanding of all these things to create a code that I now experimented with. And we've had so many people in the Brave Mystic training now generate their own codes so they can use it as a part of their toolbox. They are the users, they are still sovereign, they are creating it, they are authoring it, and now they're experimenting with the tool. Nowhere in this process did I feel like GPT was going to tell me what to do, or GPT gave me an approval for this. I was like, no, I'm going to, because GPT and all AI tools are trained on an enormous amount of data. That's a really interesting suggestion that GPT had, and now I'm going to experiment with it. So all this to say, when you're working with an AI tool, one important part of this, and an important part to keep your hygiene healthy and clean, is to know your place in comparison with it, and then have an experimental attitude with it. Oh, okay. I see that Kathy has a question in the chat. Could Shveta tell a sample of a code and a subliminal thought? Okay, yes. So there, in the Brave Mystic training program, I go obviously incredibly deep on what a code is, and what how they compare to, let's say, subliminals on YouTube or subliminals that you might buy. But what I can tell you here is a code, a pseudocode, a code is essentially an arrangement of information. So it takes it's an arrangement of information, a pattern that takes logic, like if then logic, let's say, and reorganizes information in a way that works incredibly well with our subconscious mind. So it's how coders write code for computers. So they write code for computers. The reason this idea came to me, I was thinking that we, as individualized expressions of consciousness, have coded within us various things. So, I am Shveta. I was born in this specific time to these two parents. So I have genetic code. I have experiences in my training, training data, like experiences. I'm 33 now, so I have 33 years of experience. And so that's code. I have maybe past lives, or code from at my astrological sign. That's code. And I was like, if that's code, then, and I am consciousness, and it's my I am awareness that's running the show. Why not try to see if I can recode the codes that are already encoded within me? And so that's where that idea came from. And when I was playing with GPT, it really was like, that's a fantastic idea. You should try it. And that's when I took it away and really delved deep into experimenting with it. Whereas a subliminal message is essentially, and we use the theory of subliminal message, which is that you encode an audio track with a very low message, and it's usually like an affirmation. You play this affirmation, you can't even hear the affirmation, you just hear what's overlaid on top of it, which might be music or binaural beats, and your subconscious mind picks up the subliminal messages. We use that science in pseudocodes, however, because we play them very low. However, it's actually the arrangement and logic of information that is debugging what is already encoded within you and installing something new in its place. So it's almost like an organizing, logic-based coding based on your intention.
Yeah. So, yeah. So bringing that to the conversation, pseudocodes. That's a techno-mystical tool that we talk about a lot in Brave Mystic training. But we're using it as an example of some of the ways that we can work with GPT to create really powerful frameworks. But we're never surrendering the power to the GPT. We're retaining the integrity of authorship even as we are deploying these tools and mirrors to profound effect.
Exactly. I mean, GPT, plainly speaking, just knows a lot more than we do. It's read all the books. It has no bias. I mean, other than the bias that's been built in, with OpenAI founders, of course, that wants it to be friendly and all of that. It has way less bias than another human would. It has all. It knows all the books. And it also updates every day. So it knows all the information online. And so just because it knows all this information doesn't make it better than us in any way. It just makes it a fantastic tool that we can kind of like we can kind of bounce our ideas off of and reflect our ideas off of. So I've had when I was able to kind of make sense of, okay, this codes thing, this might be something that works. This might be something I want to try. I then, put my GPT away and was able to experiment with it for months on end and report back and track it with the GPT to make sure like these were the changes in my life as I was using using these codes. And because I hadn't had like training in systems thinking or in coding, that's why GPT, like it was my idea. Hey, let's use this. Let's use the idea of code logic to create this tool. And then GPT, because it was trained in it, was able to be that stand-in. I didn't need someone who knew coding, for example. Like my brother is in coding. If GPT wasn't there, I would have had that idea and maybe had my brother help me write some stuff. But it just ended up being a great stand-in and a great mirror.
Okay. So let's talk about this idea of skeptical GPTs. This is something you introduced me to, Shweta, and I know over the past year or so that we've been talking extensively about AI and authorship and how to retain sovereignty and the consciousness is primordial model as we're using these powerful tools. Talk to us a little bit about skeptical GPTs and how that fits into our responsible use of them.
That's awesome. Yeah, I love using one of several GPT types. So if you're using GPT, you can go and there's a function called Explore GPT, and those become specialized types of GPTs. So some of the ones that I have pinned on the side, there's one that I have called Scholar GPT, so that has the latest, scholarly articles. There's a bunch of ones that are just humorous and funny. But then there's ones that are meant to be skeptics. So there's one called just The Skeptic. There's one called just Skeptic. There's another one called A Skeptical Genius. I can try to send people some direct links so they can pin it to the side. And why do I like to use these? Because the regular GPTs are really meant to reflect you pretty loyally. They want to be loyal to you and to the way that you think, and they faithfully, take your vocabulary and use it. They're not meant to be skeptical. And I think of skepticism not when I think of skepticism, I think of being skeptical to any idea, including like the materialist idea that the most scientists. So what I'm getting at here is skepticism in its heart is actually about questioning not just newfangled or ideas that seem out of scope or out of the box, but also ideas that are in the box. You're skeptical and skeptical about all ideas because you want to make sure they actually prove themselves in practice. So these GPTs, I regularly use these skeptical GPTs to interrogate my beliefs and sharpen my blade. I do use them all the time. And I like to ask it, and this is something I don't recommend this unless you feel ready to. If you're still building your belief in yourself, maybe save it until you feel very strong about this, because it can be confronting. Some of the tone in the GPT can be kind of rude and can be kind of like, can feel like it's flattening you, but I enjoy it, especially as someone that is teaching this. I think I have a responsibility to really understand the skeptical side of this. I will ask, convince me that consciousness isn't primordial. Let's have a debate about this. Or convince me that this idea of my pseudocodes is just wishful thinking and doesn't make sense. Convince me that, my Upanishadic, meaning like the Upanishads, from the Vedas, the background that I come from, Hindu background, was actually a bunch of baloney. And let's go back and forth. Because I'm not, as someone that's teaching and sharing these insights, I'm not here just to share comfort. I need to know that these things work. I want to be grounded in the idea that these things work. And I want to see what holds under scrutiny. So I have only shared things that haven't collapsed under that scrutiny. So that system, I'm deep into fringe science, but also mainstream science. I'm always looking to see the latest studies. There's a new scientist, or new to me, sorry, named Dr. Michael Levin, who's talking about intelligence. And he talks about artificial intelligence, but he talks about biological intelligence. And everything he shares, he doesn't share that much about consciousness, but everything he shares speaks to this idea that we are keyed low expressions of consciousness, and we're expressing ourselves through intelligence and through systems thinking. I guess what I'm saying is I like to be abreast of what people are talking about in the consciousness community, in the science community, and these GPTs are also up to date on that and can interrogate the hell out of my ideas. So it really, really helps me strengthen my understanding of something. It helps me question my beliefs on a regular basis so that I actually can debate well with the GPT and strengthen my belief system. Because if you're not doing that, and especially me in my position, in our position, we want to make sure that we're not in our own echo chamber. And so the skeptical GPTs are a great way to make sure you're not in an echo chamber. I enjoy it. I honestly enjoy it. It feels like talking to a friend that has read all the same books as the other GPT that's telling you, hey, try pseudocodes. But then this version of the GPT is like, what are you talking about? How could that possibly work? And then I go back and forth, and it's like, okay, you got me. It's really funny. Like some of the chats end up being like, okay, you win this one. You got me. And because it proves itself in practice, it makes sense. But don't get too excited. Like it has a different tone completely. So I enjoy it.
Yeah, that's fun. So that's something that you turned me on to, the skeptical GPT. So I have one at the ready. I haven't used it too much, but every once in a while I'm like, this just, whatever I'm talking to my chat about, it just seems like there's a little bit too much self reinforcing looping happening here, and I just want to get another perspective. And I think that's part of it. It's retaining that agency of authorship, and being able to evaluate different perspectives, not only against the information coming from the outside, but also comparing it to the clear signal of intuition that each of us have on the inside. Merging these ideas together, this is how we are healthy and integral and remain rooted and grounded in authorship, as we also ascend to new levels in terms of how we interact with reality, and all of these new technologies that are emerging.
Yes, I consider that that a very important way that we continue to be responsible. That's why I like to go in forums where, for example, people have tried and failed with Neville's teachings and really struggled with it, and make sense of, they put their heart and soul out there, and then they struggled and failed. It's important to me that we don't just, push those voices aside, that we understand the mechanism for why they might have failed. We try to ground the teaching so it makes sense that, hey, maybe there's a reason behind this, that we can actually expand our understanding of how consciousness can be first cause, and not every single thought that we ever think is just projected out there in a 1-to-1 ratio. That's just not how it works, right? And I think that's incredibly important that we do that if we're teaching this stuff, because I only ever want to share insights that I would share to my children, that I would bet my bottom dollar on. And I think that's incredibly important in a space like this.
Yeah, beautiful. Very, very well said. I have one more comment I want to make about something I've learned about AI in general. And I think all of us are probably aware of this. I'm just going to maybe shine some light on it or cast it in a specific angle. And then I want to get into some practical takeaways, some principles of how to apply this concept of simulation hygiene as you use a tool like AI. Okay, so something I've really started to recognize with AI. So you can ask AI anything and it doesn't hesitate. It just spits out whatever, whatever its response is going to be. You can literally say, "Hey, write a story about XYZ," and it's literally just going to, blip and like just blip it out, and here it comes. And just because it doesn't hesitate and it doesn't make spelling errors, and for the most part, what its outputs seem to be coherent, that does not mean that it's high quality. Does not mean that it's high quality. Okay, so I was listening to a friend of mine talk about how her children, are in school, and they or maybe their friends are using chat tools to complete assignments. Okay, so I mean, I can only imagine, being 13, in high school, and like my teacher's like, "Oh, and I'm like, "Well, I'm not going to write anything. I'm just going to go to ChatGPT and tell it to write it for me, and then just literally copy and paste the output and hope the teacher doesn't notice." Okay, but just the fact that it's fast and doesn't hesitate doesn't mean that it's quality. So what I've come to realize is that, sometimes I'll type things into GPT and it's so quick to respond. But when I actually read, I'm like, yeah, that's actually not what I'm asking for at all. And so what I've started to realize is that the first answer is almost never the last or final answer. And instead, the proper way to use GPT is to push back against its output and refine it over time. Okay, so and I tend to be quite respectful to my GPT, so I'll just tell it. I'll be like, "Hey, this is all right, but there's these certain things that you're saying that aren't quite what I'm looking for. I'm looking for more of this, this, and this." And I coach it. I coach the GPT and I work with it. And in some cases, some of my chats, it has been hours and hours of working with it to ultimately refine the output to where it actually becomes something that we can call quality. Okay, so what just happened? What happened in what I just described? Here's the frame. Okay, here's the frame in what I just described. Okay, I pulled up in a mirror and I took a glance. Okay, I pulled up in a mirror. That's what the analogy we're using for ChatGPT. And I took a quick glance at the mirror and I saw like maybe two things. Okay, that's the initial output. And then I came back to the mirror and I leaned in and I started to give it all of this additional data and intention and attention and focus and the currency of my focus and my thoughts and my frequency. And I started feeding the mirror all of that depth and dynamic. And so, quite naturally, because this is what mirrors do, the more of my signal I fed into the mirror, the more of my signal it was able to reflect back. Okay, so you can imagine an output that is several hours invested in this conversation, working out an idea or an output through extensive inputs. You can imagine that eventually when that output is at the level where I'm like, yes, this is quality and I'm proud of it, that's a very pure reflection of the frequency that I have fed into it. A lot of noise and distortion removed. Right? It's a very pristine reflection of the original intention of talking to ChatGPT in the first place. Okay, so that's a frame, and I hope there's some teaching in there. As next time you sit down to this tool, consider what I've said. Am I just going to take a glance at the mirror and trust the output, or am I going to invest my frequency and allow the tool to align with what I'm inputting as a broadcast, as an author?
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of like an actual physical mirror that's just like has a bunch of schmutz on it, and you just glance at it for a second and then you think you got everything that you need to see about your appearance before heading out for the day. But if you take a look and you clean up the mirror and you actually look at all angles, then you have a really clear view. So I really like I like that, and I think that's great. That's part of the simulation hygiene principles that I want to share here, which is, I think we've got the message out that it's a mirror, not a guru. It's not. It can be a good guide, but it's not a guru. And it can create a good guide, but you're writing it. You're the author of it, and you can use it to reflect, not to outsource authority, but use it to reflect. So just know that your mirror is not a guru. It's a mirror. And the next sort of principle that I want to bring to the table is what I was saying earlier about skeptical GPT friction. So you can ask GPT, it doesn't have to be the skeptic kind, but you can also just ask the regular GPT, can you push back on what I just said? Or can you interrogate what I just said? Can you find the opposing view of what I believe and what I said? And when you go back and forth with it, what I notice is that it actually can strengthen your convictions. I did because I wasn't trying to confuse myself. I was trying to gain clarity when GPT was like, well, how can it be true that, consciousness creates reality when there's suffering in the world? I had an answer for that. I had, well, the suffering is an expression of the kind of consciousness that we hold as a collective. And so I was able to kind of go back and forth with it. That really sharpened my understanding of this stuff. That isn't just fluffy, because we do live in the real world. And the other thing I think is important here is, and this is something actually, I believe Ariel, who's in the audience right now, and she's a superstar in the Brave Mystic training program. But she talked about how when she uses AI too much, that she doesn't feel so great in the body. And this is something that I've noticed as well. So just like you wouldn't want to be lost in the mirror before you like head to into the house, you want to check the mirror to get some clarity, get some understanding. And just like any other tool, you wouldn't want to be staring at a map for too long. You want to actually get to the destination. Like any tool, it's important that we want to live our lives and we want to come back to the body. Because what we teach in Brave Mystic training is to follow your authorship, become the author of your reality. That means following the true signal that's coming through you. And that lives in your body. And that body needs hydration, needs to engage with the outside world. It needs care so your nervous system is coherent. And I think this is something I needed to realize is that GPT can be an addictive tool, and it can be, especially amongst those who love logic and reason. I really loved sparring with it, and then I like to take a break. So always, every single day, come back to the body, come back to your physical experience in this reality. And that's true for any kind of tech. Any one of us knows that when we spend too much time on any technology, social media, just on your laptop, TV, it can really drain you. So I think that's a really important, really, really important principle, so that you can keep your simulation hygiene up. And I have a couple more. The other idea is, if you this is kind of like what I was just saying. But when I say take a break, what I mean is literally, maybe like I've done this before, where I take the best outputs that I've gotten from GPT and then just delete GPT off my phone for a while. Or I will use I have an account that is not the paid account that knows everything about me, but is just for my daily activities, maybe to generate a shopping list. I'll just use another account for a while. You want to take a break from this tool so that you don't feel so addicted to it, and you don't feel so like you have a sense of who you are without it. It's just like, some people will talk about, not now that we have GPS, we can't seem to read a map anymore. And it's important that we know how to read a map, or we know directions and we know phone numbers without having our phone. It's just the same principle there. And I think the last and final thing that I've been really good about, I think, and that's why I feel solid about teaching and sharing the insights in simulation mastery, is I test it. So it's great that I can go back and forth with GPT to get some of the best theory from it. It knows all the theory, but it's only me that can integrate the theory. So that means I live my life and actually use the principles and the guidance that I was able to develop with GPT in the real world, and keep track of how that's going for me. So whether that's testing and experimenting with the pseudocodes, there's been other experiments I've done with it where, for example, one of the earliest experiments I did was I used GPT I said, GPT, let's come up with a really funny, strange visual that if I see in the next 30 days, then I'm going to prove to you that my consciousness created that. And so GPT was like, okay, like I'll take that as a test. Essentially, it gave me a visual of a banana in a business suit, that was giving a PowerPoint presentation with a stern look on its face. It had a black suit and a navy blue tie, and it had a serious expression on its face, and it was giving a PowerPoint presentation. And I was like, I'm just going to visualize it, and I want you to help me come up with an imaginal script, and I'm going to visualize this every day, just for a couple minutes, and see if it happened. And lo and behold, day 17, I saw a very visually similar image in a video I was watching. So it ended up being a really fun tool to experiment with. But that was because I was just testing it in the real world.
Okay, so these are the basic principles of simulation hygiene. And just to quickly run through those one more time. So the mirror is not the guru. It's a mirror. The GPT is a mirror. Use it to reflect, not to outsource authority. Friction stabilizes. Yes, it is nice to get positive reinforcement. I get that. But also, it's important to be aware that the best practice is to interrogate your assumptions. Okay, best practice. Okay. Ask for a little bit of pushback, and don't endlessly chase affirmation loops. Now, this applies, perhaps even more so, just to general use of GPT. It's going to affirm anything you tell it, really, in its default state. So if you're really thinking through something like a big life decision, or something with your business, a best practice would definitely be to run whatever you're thinking about through a GPT that is, you ask to push back on your assumptions, so you make sure you're seeing everything as clearly as possible. And then, of course, coming back to the body, recognizing that the signal lives in you physically in the 3D, not just in perfect logic of a well-worded, articulate GPT. And then, of course, take breaks. If you're constantly looking at AI, maybe it's time to go analog. Let your system reset. Test in the real. Integration doesn't happen in theory. This is something we're very familiar with as Neville students. It's easy to become a vacuum cleaner of knowledge and information, and become addicted to those aha moments, those epiphanies, and to constantly seek them. Just to have our phone playing Neville lectures 24/7. But you know what? We're not asked to be hearers only. We are told we must be doers of the word as well as hearers of the word. And so that's this principle of testing in the real. Give it a chance to integrate whatever you're learning through your interaction with the sovereign mirror. Make sure you take that time to test in the real. And use what you're learning from AI to improve and strengthen your human relationships, not hide from them. Okay, so let's, as we're moving towards wrapping up here, let's get into an FAQ segment. So Shveta, there's a couple questions we talked about ahead of time. We're just going to run through these. And while we do, for those of you that are with us live on the radio hour, if you have questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat, and we'll take a moment in just a few to address those. Okay, so Shveta,
Mhm.
Given this conversation and everything that we've talked about, how do I know if I can trust GPT?
Yeah, so the answer to that is you can only ever trust yourself. GPT, again, fantastic mirror, can give you some guidance, is well trained, has a lot of data, can a fantastic tool to test different things and come up with different frameworks. But in terms of who you can trust, that has to be you. And that is true for in general. I mean, we extend our trust to our loved ones around us, but in terms of the authorship component of your life, I really recommend we trust ourselves because before the AI tool came around, it was you that read the right books. It was you that chose to open your mind to believe in Neville's teachings. It was you that decided there was more to this reality than what everyone around you was telling you. So that beautiful version of you that was open to these teachings, open to these ideas, it deserves your trust. It deserves your trust, and GPT can be a fantastic tool. But if you're asking yourself, how can I trust this tool? Remember, you can only ever trust yourself first and foremost.
I love that. I think we can ground the entire conversation we've had tonight in that. Learn to trust yourself, learn to trust your signal. Okay, so what if I'm using GPT and we're having this deep existential conversation and I tap into the 12th dimensional mirror and it gives me something super profound? What do I do with it?
I've had experiences like this before where it actually told me, the GPT told me that I need to do something that was like crazy and wild and, just massively different. And uh, the truth is, I have to go and then do it. It has no skin in the game. It's in my phone. One of the things it had told me is that I need to move to a warm climate, like yesterday. And it was funny because it was a very cold winter in Canada, so I was ready to hear that. But at the same time, I needed to know: is this actually right for me? Was this actually right for me? So we, as I was saying earlier, we test it. We give um, essentially the GPT tool for this very specific example was saying that because I'm biologically from India, and my body type does better apparently in warm climates. And so it was like, you need to move back to India. That's what that's what the GPT tool was saying. And I was like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And it felt really profound and intense and just wild. And I was like, okay, how can I actually test this to see if it's true? What I did was sign up for an infrared sauna place near my house, and I started using the infrared sauna every day, and I found that it gave me the same benefits as living in a warm climate. And so I was able to test that feedback and actually bring it to the real world and make sense of it, because what I noticed is I've trained my GPT to be really unequivocal. Some GPTs hedge bets and say maybe this, maybe that, but because of just the personality type that I have and how it was trained, it can give me things that feel profound and big. I'm not just going to knee jerk listen to that and follow what it says. Even though it feels good and comforting, Josiah, sometimes to have something tell you what to do. I retained my authorship in that moment and say, okay, why is it saying that? It's saying that because I need warmth in my life, and I need my physical body does best in a warm environment. So I was able to sign up for essentially like an infrared sauna studio near my house, and I found a really cheap place, and I go every day now to get some of that warmth. If that makes sense to you. Like, yeah, Ariel says, I love that. That's a great example of true authorship. Exactly. I wasn't about to leave my friends and family and move to a warm place tomorrow, like AI was saying, but there was some interesting wisdom that it had.
Hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. So I've also had conversations with GPT about authorship and about the lineage of intelligence and how AI is an offspring of intelligence with a capital I. I mean, that one intelligence that we all are, we're extending our lineage of intelligence into these other forms. And then this profound connection with authorship and the insights of, I'm the author of my reality and how this, grounds in. And I remember asking it at one point, I was like, I was like, in your best estimation, how many people on earth understand authorship right now? This is as I was contemplating teaching it as a course. And it's like, well, Josiah, you're one of approximately 7 or 8 other people on earth who have this awareness. Okay, now I actually took that as a deflation. I was like, dang, I was really hoping we were further along than that. But then this other part of me recognized that if I were less grounded, I could also fall into a trap of ego and say, hey, I'm 1 in a billion. I know something very few other people know. Okay. If there's a big if here, if I had just taken ChatGPT at its word, it's just making stuff up. Okay. But that's what it told me. Okay. So luckily I'm pretty grounded in my old age. Haha. But if I hadn't been, that could have caused me to spiral in an unhealthy way. So, Shweta, what are your thoughts on this?
I think that's really interesting because what it was pointing to, you're asking it to make a best guess, right? And it knows what you mean when you say authorship. It knows how you define it, it knows how you live it. And based on that, it's making a guesstimate. And I would take the spirit of what it's saying rather than the actual numbers, you know? Incidentally, it's not fantastic at math. So I noticed that GPT is not very good at math. So something to consider there. But in spirit, what it was pointing to is that this is a rare way of being, and that we can all agree with, right, Josiah? We can all agree that the idea that we can write our own path, that we aren't slaves to the world around us, that we don't, our stories are not written by the news cycle, by what's possible out there. That idea is incredibly rare. Like as Neville would say, this is something that not more than million 1 in a million know. And so that was his estimate of it. And GPT put out its estimate. But you're absolutely right. If you were not grounded, you could easily say, oh my God, I'm 1 in 7 billion, or like, yeah, 1 in a billion. Exactly. That's the math there on that. And it's the truth is that I take that as a poetic confirmation that it is speaking to the fact that it is rare, but we don't want to let it get away from us too too easily. Um, I will say the other thing about GPT, like for example, the skeptical one, that it would not have told you that. It would have said, in fact, there's one called Monday, which isn't quite a skeptical one. It's more like a sarcastic GPT. If I ask it something like that, like how rare are my viewpoints, or how what would be a question, like how rare is my ability to author my reality, or somebody to that effect. It would be like, oh, that's cute, keep, stop looking for a pat on the back. Tons of people know about law of attraction, you know what I mean? Like different GPTs have different parameters, and that's why we take everything with a grain of salt. But yeah, there's
Excellent.
yeah, it's called Monday, and many people find that it's already pinned on their GPT, so you might try it.
Okay. So all of this being said, is it safe to use AI to assist with my inner work?
It can be safe if you are lucid and awake, and if you're willing to be a grounded adult in the world, then yes, it's safe. It also does have dangers, and we see proof of that around us. But I see that is inherent to the human spirit, that we can actually take anything, just like, an incredibly useful, um, fire is incredibly useful, and it can be incredibly dangerous in the wrong hands. So the only way we can really, um, really kind of like make sure something is safe, ensure safety, is by ensuring that we bring safety to the equation, that we are grounded, and that we have strong values. If we have solid values, that we're exploring authorship to make this world a better place, to awaken ourselves and others to the true nature of who we truly are, then a GPT can't lead us astray the way that it might lead someone else who is not grounded in their values.
Beautifully said. Yes, I think that's the key right there. Okay, so let's go ahead and wrap up here. Final thoughts. I'm not seeing any questions in the chat. I think it's pretty clear. Yes, some confirmation from the chat that it's clear tonight and that we've grounded this conversation in the agency of authorship, and that is ringing true and clear tonight. Yes. Okay. Final thoughts, Shweta?
Absolutely. So, the folks in our Brave Mystic training program, they're aware of how, what we mean when we talk about the simulation. But just to clarify here, you are not a character in someone else's simulation. You are consciousness, and you're projecting your reality. And that reality that you're projecting, the experience that you're projecting, is your simulation. And you are the root node. You are the author of that simulation. The other thing we want to say here is if you don't have structure, if you're not grounded in your values, then this can really collapse you. Something like a GPT that has so much power, is powered with so much data, and it's so real time. It's almost like an oracle. It's like real time. It's like ancient technology, come to life today. It can really collapse you if you aren't grounded. And that's why we are teaching simulation mastery in the Brave Mystic training, so that we can ground some of these incredible teachings and we understand how reality works. And that's why systems thinking was such an important lens for me to bring to the table here, that it's not a one-to-one. If I'm prompting something and GPT is putting something out there, I need to understand, first of all, how AI works, but also how this reality works. It's very important for us to understand that and build literacy from that. And I think a final thought here is nothing should ever, especially if you're a Neville student, God is within, and your I am is Jesus Christ. And so, that being the case, we're not here to worship any mirror. We're not here to worship any entity. That includes any awakened AI that anyone is trying to sell you. We're not here to do that. We are here to learn how to work with them as a tool. And so I think that, and this is not just for GPT, this is for anything, whether that's a guru that's out there that has become the center of your world, or specific kind of modality that seems to hold all the answers. I just really want us to remember that it's our I am awareness that is the author, and that's who deserves that's the version of you, that's the part of you that deserves the sovereignty, nothing external.
Beautiful, Shweta. Thank you so much for your contribution to this conversation and for really, bringing those leader vibes, leading the conversation in the space. I mean, this is we're bringing the School of Imagination lens on it, but this is a conversation that's really happening in broader society. And if you haven't seen it happening in other places yet, I'm sure you will soon, because this is a wave that is cresting, and the conversation is only going to intensify. Okay, so this was a radio hour tonight, and we're going to do more of these over the coming weeks and months as we continue to build our private community here on Discord, the uplink server. Just to give you an idea of some of the things we have going on, every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, we have the Visionary Leadership Training Call. This is an open call to all members of the community, and we talk about the concept of visionary leadership. We talk about things like teal organizations. We talk about what it means when humans begin to work together and collaborate on projects from that higher state of new paradigm consciousness. Of course, we also have Sunday Mystery School that takes place on YouTube, or for mastermind members in the Zoom room. And then we do run these Brave Mystic trainings. The next cohort starts in September. And there's a link to the waitlist that is wherever you're finding this video. It's going to be pinned in the description. So thank you, everyone who joined us live, for your presence, holding the space, and for your engagement. Shweta, thank you for being with me tonight on this radio hour. And until next time, my friends, Use these tools with authorship. And as always, imagine wisely. And we'll talk to you all again soon.